Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Taboo Table Talk. I'm your host, Krish Mohan, and these are your pre-show announcements that I'm hoping to get through without having my throat seize up on me for no apparent reason. Hey, I want to quickly thank everybody that came out to the live show in Pittsburgh, in front of a live audience inside of a venue. We were at the Irma Freeman last week, and I want to thank everybody that came out. It really meant a lot. It was the first time doing that show in front of a live audience, and everybody was really awesome and very open to, whatever that show was going to be. And, it needs work. It's going to keep getting tweaked and all that sort of stuff. So thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I have one more show in October, one more live show in October. October 17th, I'm going to be at Smitty's Bar in Washington, D.C. So if you're in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area and you want to come out, this is going to be in Smitty's back patio, so it will be a semi-outdoor show to add a little extra level of safety in these uncertain times. So that's October 17th. Doors will be open at 7:30. Showtime is at 8 p.m. Come hang out. It should be a really fun time. I'm looking forward to that show. Other than that, there will be a couple of virtual stand-up comedy shows where I will be running my brand new hour, Citizen Revolution, because I know I had to cancel a lot of these shows. Those dates are going to be scheduled soon, probably in the next week. It's just a matter of sitting down with my calendar and going over, all of the other obligations and dates that I have. So I will have those dates coming out soon. If you want to help support this podcast and pretty much all of the other projects I do, from the live and virtual Forkful of Noodles shows, the dispatches, the live streams when they come back, the essays, all of the creative stuff that I do. If you want to help financially support those, you can become a sustaining member, make monthly contributions, or make a one-time donation over on my website at krishmohanhaha.com. It's KRISHMOHANHAHA.com/donate. If you go to krishmohanhaha.com/donate, you will find various different ways that you can contribute, and you can contribute, through whatever platform you are comfortable contributing through. And I want to thank all the people that have become sustaining members and that have made donations and contributions. Those help immensely. So I'm very, very, very grateful for you guys. And last but not least, I have a bunch of stand-up comedy albums available on my website as well. A lot of the material is still relevant. So I hope that you will go and check some of those out if you haven't already. Again, the website is krishmohanhaha.com. It's KRISHMOHANHAHA.com. All right, that is all for the pre-show announcements. And now, let's get into this week's episode. Enjoy it, everybody. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Taboo Table Talk. I'm your host, Krish Mohan. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a big show for you guys, a two-part episode. So this is part one of two coming at you guys, with the one and only Kieth McHenry, the creator and proprietor of Food Not Bombs. Is that the right way to say that? Proprietor? Am I allowed to? I don't know if that's... I'm definitely not going to call him a CEO, I'll tell you that. But Kieth McHenry from Food Not Bombs. That's our guest this week and next week, because it's a two-parter, and that's I don't know if you know, but that's how two-parters work, you guys. Is they start with the first part, and then they end with with the second one. Not necessary for me to explain that to you, but I did just in case. There might be somebody that doesn't know how two-parters work, you know. But Keith has stories for days, and that's kind of what this is. So I think this is really cool. It's not only is it a extremely informational and educational podcast about organizing and activism, but these are just really awesome stories. And Keith is a really, really great storyteller as well. So if you're unfamiliar with Food Not Bombs, you're about to get very familiar with them. And for those, that might keep up with what I do, when I did the show on housing, the Forkful of Noodles on housing as a human right and homelessness, and how we kind of take care of this very prevalent issue in our society. Keith McHenry's stories and his perspective and what he has done was one of the things that I brought up as a way to help, as a way to fight back against the systemic oppression that creates homelessness and crime and all that, the capitalist system that we live in, and why we have to change it. He was a big part of that, and I was very excited. I'll tell you guys this: the little email exchange we had, before the podcast was just fantastic. It was probably one of my favorite email exchanges I've ever received. So I contacted him. Steve Poinkanen from Slow News Day helped me reach out to Keith, and I was not particularly expecting a response, because to me Keith is a big deal kind of person. He's up there in the world of organizing and activism and everything. And I figured, well, he's probably going to be a little bit too busy to come do a tiny little show like this. But he was super nice and came out and said he was a fan of my stuff and had been following me for a few years. And I was like, holy shit, fucking Keith McHenry knows my work. Keith McHenry from Food Not Bombs knows who I am. That's fucking crazy. It's always wild to me when people that I look up to go, yeah, I've heard of you. I've seen you perform. I've actually been following your stuff. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? I think that's very cool. So that was kind of I felt very honored that he said yes and wanted to do the podcast. And then on top of that, it turns out to be these amazing, badass stories that he tells, that I think only Keith, there's nobody else that can really tell these stories. I would love to, if at all possible, make a movie based on some of his experiences, because they're just so, some of them are just beyond belief, but that they fucking happened to him. And yeah, just to give you, if you're kind of I don't know, what could these really be? Just to let you know, Food Not Bombs is on the terror watch list for the FBI. Did I get you? Are you gripped? Yeah? All right. Perfect. So let's dive into this conversation with the absolutely delightful and wonderful Keith McHenry of Food Not Bombs, everybody. Enjoy it. Enjoy the conversation. I wanted to, just in case anybody doesn't know about Food Not Bombs, how did Food Not Bombs get started, and what was, what inspired you to start something like that? Because it's just so simple but innovative, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so it was a series of kind of just being alive that it happened. So I was an art student studying painting and sculpture at Boston University, and so and one of the things is you had to take like academic classes, and one of them I took was American history with Howard Zinn. And so what we he would talk about is going to protest against the Seabrook Nuclear Power Station in New Hampshire. And this is around a time where a lot of volatility around nuclear power. 3 Mile Island and outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that was happening, and all these things
Yeah.
like that. So I started participating with Clamshell Alliance and the Direct Action, the Coalition for Direct Action at Seabrook, which is kind of a more anarchist, more a little bit more militant than the Clamshell, but in those protests. And so on May 24th of 1980, um, one of my friends, a law student at Boston University, Brian Feigenbaum, was arrested, just picked out of the crowd and charged with a felony assault of a police officer. And we found a person with some means who could bail him out. And so on the way home, the people that became Food Not Bombs were going home and to Boston, and said, "Oh, we should raise money to pay him back, of course." And so one of our ideas was a bake sale. So we really never made any money doing bake sales, but one of the other ways we were surviving was we had an old van and we had a moving company called Smooth Move. So we were moving this family, and they were throwing out a poster mounted on cardboard that said, "Wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed, and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber?" So we thought, fantastic, this will up our game. So we went to the Army Navy surplus store, bought some military uniforms, made like little general badges out of cardboard that we carefully painted and pinned to our clothing. Went to Harvard Square, for example, and set up with our sign and our baked goods and tried to convince people that we're trying to buy a bomber. And oddly enough, there was this strange story that was circulating about how a 5 cent bolt that you could get at the hardware store was costing $1,500 when it was attached to a bomber. And there was all this the same weapons procurement scandals that actually, I have to say, my great grandfather, Dr. James McHenry, helped determine. He skewed a contract to build a ship in Baltimore and a fort, which got named after him, called Fort McHenry.
Oh, no
Um,
kidding.
yeah, so
Oh,
that's like,
that's awesome.
yeah.
That's
And he signed the U.S. Constitution. He actually was pretty active in the Continental Congress and producing the U.S. Constitution. He was George Washington's best friend. He was at the surrender of Yorktown with Cornwallis. He was at the Battle of Bunker Hill as a doctor, setting up a field hospital, and he became um, Secretary of War under Washington and under Adams, and he's the founder of the U.S. military.
oh
So that's a
yeah.
brief history of the first McHenry to enter the New World in 1773, and we even have a family national anthem called the Star Spangled Banner. And so it's kind of overwhelming. And then the other side of the family is also, some of them are, my great uncle shot Jesse James in the back of the head in Joplin. So there was that. My mom's dad firebombed Tokyo in Operation Meeting House. He tried to convince generals to drop the atomic bomb on Hanoi actively. So my family's kind of immersed in U.S. history basically,
That's
and
incredible.
kind of weird, isn't it? So
Yeah. What an amazing like family quilt that would be. Like if ever I feel like that's incredible. You're like one of the most American families in America, it seems like.
Yeah, and it is kind of funny that I was declared one of America's most hardcore terrorists on August 29th of 1988, and I still am on that list, and maybe even higher. And
Well, you're feeding people, and that's
yes, this
a
is
problem.
domestic terror. It's a domestic. So, for instance, on Say Something, See Something, Say Something Day, you certainly want to call in any observations of if you see people serving vegan meals on a street corner. Make sure the Joint Terrorism Task Force knows about it, because that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem. You're feeding people; they're able to think clearly. They're calling out the CIA's bullshit.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah. So anyway, back to the founding story.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was a lot of fun doing this. Although we made no more money, we had a blast. And so that's one of the stories. And also around this time, one of the other co-founders, Joe Swanson, was participating with the theater games of the Living Theater, which is a very famous theater with mostly associated with New York City, but they also operated out of Italy and stuff. Anybody that had seen My Dinner with Andre will see that was featured. In fact, our close friend of ours is one of the people that was discussed in that movie, who inspired us to. I think her name Justin, and I don't know her last name, but she was kind of our into the Living Theater and why we had that. And so this theater thing became like an important element of Food Not Bombs. And at that time, there was relatively few unhoused people. So the other thing was happening was I was a produce worker. I had learned that you could get your entire employment done in the morning by setting up produce before 9 o'clock. And then you could go to college after that. And so you made a living and you had time to go to school. Yeah. So I one day, this little scrawny guy came to the back of the Bread and Circus, which is now probably the smallest Whole Foods on earth, in Cambridge on Prospect, and he said, "Oh wow, I live at Broadway Street House, and I think it might have been the Catholic Worker House or something, and they needed, do we have any food worth throwing out? Because I'm in the first, I'm helping open the original store there." And so that's when, so then I said, "Oh, wow, that's a great idea." So I said, "Here, I've got like 5 cases of wilted produce. You want it?" They go, "Well, I only need 1. So I said, "Okay, I'll take the rest to the housing project down the street." And at the housing project, I would go there like after work almost every day now, because I had this, and then I became friends with mainly mothers who were, would go through all the boxes of food and stuff and take what they wanted, and they they would complain about how their plumbing didn't work because it's public housing. The electricity was irregular, so on. And then across the street was this huge vacant lot behind MIT with one brand new building, which turned out to be Draper Laboratory. And they're telling me, "Oh yeah, they've designed nuclear bombs over there," and hence that's where the name Food Not Bombs comes from. And then the final thing that really is what we kind of think of as Food Not Bombs is we had also organized a kind of like a group or whatever called the First National Bank Project. And we were doing research on the First National Bank of Boston's investment policies in Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, which then led us to find out that the board of directors were also the director of Raytheon Missile Systems and Lockheed Martin and General Electric and so on. And so they were basically lending themselves money to advance the nuclear industry with virtually no oversight. And so then Ronald Reagan wins the election, of course, through the Iran-Contra scandal and all that. And the 444 days of the 52 CIA agents being held captive at the embassy in Tehran, and all those kind of things going on at that time. And so we decided that we would do a soup line outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston at the Federal Reserve Bank at South Station on Atlantic Avenue. and we would dress up like hobos, and we'd get all our friends to dress like hobos, and we'd all go down there and say the policies of Reagan, who had just, a month, this was March 26, 1981, so he'd been in power like about 6 weeks, and maybe even not that. And so we were, that was our idea. And we made this huge amount of food out of the food I was bringing home from the bread and circus. And we then went to, we realized, well, we've done lousy outreach on this protest. So there's not going to be a line, there'll be the 8 of us, maybe one person in line, would be like running around trying to look like a line. And so I thought, man, we should just go to the shelter. And in those days, there was this one shelter called the Pine Street Inn, which was a holdover from the Great Depression. And I get there about midnight, and like a manager named Mark let us in. And needless to say, so I'm like maybe, I'm about to turn 23. And I give a speech to the people there. And they're like, oh, great, a protest like the 60s, it was really good, and it was like kind of sad to see like 30, 40 guys like sitting on concrete benches, and just trying not to freeze to death in March in Boston. So anyway, we set up at noon outside the Federal Reserve Bank, and these guys, mostly guys, one unhoused woman showed up. And I remember this businessman coming out of South Station, probably like in his mid-30s, and he's like, "Oh my God, Reagan's only been in office like a little while, and there's already soup lines on the streets of America. This is outrageous, And we go, "Wow, this is pretty cool." And we had some of the stockholders flip us off. We had other stockholders that praised us because they hated the bank, and they were there for some, to protest the bank, and bought a stock so they could do that. But the main message we got, like, it was chilling, really. So these people, the person would come up, we'd give them the soup. It was like, we didn't really know what we're doing. And they would go, "God bless you." And you got tears in your eyes and like that. And then as we were like kind of hanging out with everybody, they're like, you should do this every day. There's no food for homeless people in Boston. You should do this every day. All we get is our Dunkin' Donuts and coffee in the morning. And then when we come back, we get Dunkin' Donuts and coffee again. And then otherwise we're just getting food out of garbage cans, And so we thought, wow, that's a great idea. We'll be happy to do that. So that night, we decided we'd all quit our jobs and do nothing but collect food, take it to housing projects, take it to Rosie's Place was a battered women's shelter, to Osmond Alcoholism Center, to daycare centers, and then do our street theater with food every afternoon. And so that's what we did. I gave 2 weeks notice. I made arrangements to get a tofu delivery from a tofu manufacturer in Western Massachusetts to the back of Bread and Circus. And we went to Panera. We had picked up bread at Panera Bread, which at that time was Obab Pond, and stuff like that. So that became like this thing that we did for me. I did that for 8 years in Boston. Until I got in trouble for a number of things, one of which was being against an anti-homeless campaign that my business association, that by this time I was a member of, and that they were they were dehumanizing friends of mine, including a man by the name of Mr. Butch, Harold, I forget Harold's last name, but anyway, but he was called Mr. Butch, the mayor of Kenmore Square, and the Kenmore Square Businessmen's Association wanted to have me take a photo of him, put a red circle around it with a line through it saying "wanted out of Kenmore Square." Now that I stupidly, in a way, now many years later, felt like I should have actually done that, because that would have torpedoed their program. Because for example, when Mr. Butch passed away, there were vigils for Mr. Butch in every New England town, because what the whole thing about Mr. Butch was, and why he was the king of Kenmore Square, or the mayor of Kenmore Square, was he would stand in front of Captain Nemo's Pizza with a broken guitar. He looked just like Jimi Hendrix, and he would kiss babies, and he would hug people, and he would like, sort of a lame version of panhandling, because that really wasn't his interest. And 35,000 Red Sox fans would pass by them on their way to the game, and then pass by them mostly drunk on their way back. And he'd become friends with the people of New England, particularly the Red Sox fans of New England. While as Paul, the man that was going to hire me or asked me to make this poster, just went off into, who no one ever paid attention to him. I don't know anything about his funeral or even if he's dead. But everybody knows about Mr. Butch and his role in the street scene and in the punk culture of Boston. He's like a figure and loved. And my wife insisted that he soak his feet in our bathtub every Friday night, and he would hem and haw and complain, and then his feet would be in the warm, hot, soapy water, and he would just go, ah. And this went on for a couple of years, But anyway, so I'm driven out of Boston, and then resurface in San Francisco after an acquaintance of mine, Brian Wilson, who was Veterans for Peace, was hit by a train at Concord Naval Weapons Station, and his legs were severed. And I was actually underground at this moment, trying to hide from a number of characters involved in the earlier situation, who were connected to the mafia. And
oh no!
So I that was the pretty death threats got to be very realistic. So I moved into a truck and hid with my wife and my dog. And so anyway, that's what got me doing starting a San Francisco Food Not Bombs. And that's not long after that, we get declared technically speaking, on August 29th, Joint Terrorism Task Force memo to the San Francisco FBI office declares us a national security threat. And then National Guard have a workshop on domestic terrorism, that Thanksgiving holiday, where we are featured in workshops across the country on the domestic terrorism threat. And then that's when we become a domestic terrorist, and we still are. And so I can't wait for the new domestic terrorism bill to get passed. And that's why I'm all excited about See Something, Say Something, a registered trademark of the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, you got to brand it. You got to brand it. You can't have it not branded.
Yeah.
That's why. So what was kind of the event that put you guys on this watch list? I can't imagine. I can't. I mean, I want to try to make a joke out of it, but it's just the situation in and of itself is just so comical. That an organization called Food Not Bombs would be on a terror watch list. It was us and Earth First were essentially at that moment in history were the terrorists in the United States. You mean, right? And we were actually, we fed Earth First protests. So I don't know, that might have helped. But we hadn't done much of that yet. So really, this is what's kind of fascinating is, we are like set up every month. We had found out that there were no food for unhoused people in the Haight-Ashbury on Mondays. So we took that slot at the entrance to Golden Gate Park at the corner of Haight and Stanton, across from McDonald's and Cal Foods, which is now a Whole Foods also. And we would be there at noon every Monday, and we had literature, and there was like a lot, particularly when the Grateful Dead would go through town, we would have a lot of psychedelic-looking people, and it was a ton of fun. And we did that every Monday, and we had a great time. And then this hippie came by, who turns out to be the director of the Haight-Ashbury Soup Kitchen, which had 4 of the days. And he says, oh, you can get a permit for this. Just send a letter to the Recreation and Parks Department. So we do on July 11th of 1988.
And every Monday, cops would come by and say, "Oh, do you have a permit?" And I go, "Well, we wrote for one, but we don't know." And then I would go down to the office, which is like a block away. They had no idea what's going on. So then on August 15th of 88, about 40 riot police show up and arrest 9 of us for serving free food without a permit, of which I'm the first person arrested. Even though technically speaking, I did not serve food that day. I'd actually been out of the hospital for about long enough to walk from the hospital to the site, which was a block up. Hospital's across the street from the Recreation and Parks Department office. And I'd had a ruptured appendix, so I'd spent a week in there before all this happened.
No.
And so then I go, they arrest me. My poor wife, she's like, when they're putting me in the paddy wagon, she's running along with the cop. He just got out of the hospital. And I remember if you see profile pictures of me, it's me and this cop that looks like Darth Vader or whatever. And he's taking me away. And he lifts up my shirt and he goes, "Oh, fuck." I hope we can say fuck. But anyway, So that happened. And then there was like chanting and, people singing, "We shall overcome" in the paddy wagons and stuff like that. So that becomes the first arrest. Right now, at that moment, there's like my friends I left behind in Boston doing Food Not Bombs, some kids that we met at the Nevada test site in March who were calling themselves Bread Not Bombs, and we convinced them to change their name to Food Not Bombs. So now you have maybe 10 people in Boston, 10 people in Long Beach, California, and 10 people in San Francisco serving vegan meals and literature on the streets. So 30 people are suddenly on the 29th of August of that year a national security threat. Now, this we know from FOIAs and receiving FBI documents. It appears that the reason that this is a problem for the state is that they are concerned that we might convince the public that money should be diverted from military spending to education, healthcare, and other social services. Oh. And now, why I know this information, or one of the leads to this, is in April of 2009, I was on a speaking tour, and I was at Princeton University, and I gave a lecture there. And then that evening, I go back to I forget the name of the place, but it's where speakers speak. I remember the woman running it goes, "Oh, you get room 7. That's where Condoleezza Rice stayed." I'm like, "Oh, wow, that sounds good." And they had like several, you can imagine Princeton. They had a bunch of like remote controls. It turned out one operated the bed, which I'd never been in a bed that had a remote control, and one of them operated the TV, which looked like it was going to fall on whoever was in the bed, because this is an old colonial building that I think George Washington slept there. And so anyway,
before or after he chopped down the cherry tree.
And then after he froze his ass on the crossing of Delaware. And then anyway, so he in fact, I think sadly that is true. And so so I turn it on, and I don't like TV, but I thought, well, I'll watch C-SPAN books or C-SPAN something or other. And what C-SPAN has was a lecture. So I'm watching this lecture, which I believe was the Fletcher School of Diplomacy, and it was a State Department official. And they were comparing Al-Qaeda to the people that were serving free vegan meals in the park. Who is more dangerous? And the conclusion was that the people serving vegan meals would probably go on another 30 years. So they never say Food Not Bombs, but, we're approaching 30 years about that time. Or we would be in a bit, they were right. And right. And then and that Al-Qaeda probably wouldn't even last 20 years, because who would want to put on bombs and kill themselves? It's very unappealing. But the the people with the vegan meals were indigenous to their community and loved by their community, and therefore they could convince the American public that money should be diverted from military spending towards education, healthcare, and other social services. So I'm like, wow, that sounds pretty intense. I don't know really what's going on here. So then I get to speak at Harvard Law about 3 or 4 days later, and I go to my father's retirement home where he was living in Boston, and I turn on the little tiny TV that he had in his wife's sewing room, and whoa, it's C-SPAN at exactly the same point as the lecture I'd seen in Princeton. And that's when I go, oh, this was real. I was not hallucinating. And sadly, I was actually being jacked up by probably the FBI. I'm hoping I get FOIA documents about this, but this huge crisis was going on in my back in Taos, New Mexico, where I was living at the time, and so I was dealing with that and doing a tour, and as a result, it never occurred to me to contact C-SPAN and find out who the people were that were speaking. And I would love to have a copy of that video, because that very much confirms what what people in 1988 were indicating was the problem, that Chevron, Bechtel, and the Bank of America, who are heavily invested in military contracts, were pressuring the city to arrest us. Real estate interests, particularly a real estate company out of China, 4Cs, I believe was the name of it, they were pressuring the city to arrest us because they were trying to gentrify the Haight-Ashbury. In fact, it even renamed it Coal Valley so that people speculating in property wouldn't think it was a rundown ghetto full of hippies and would buy the property. And then there was also the issue of the San Francisco police had a political interest to put the liberal mayor Art Agnos in his place. And of course, and then I eventually learned through a very bizarre situation that, Nancy Pelosi's involvement in this, and that is basically in about 2000, maybe 1999. I had been homeless in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was riding my bike to the Y to get my shower, and this woman ran out of a house, and there was smoke everywhere, and she thought the house was burning. And I went to check it out, and found out it was a diesel truck behind her house in the next block, and her filling her house with diesel. And she asked me out on a date. We went on this date. I told about my life, and then she said, "Well, let's get together after Thanksgiving." She calls me up after Thanksgiving, and I take her to this fancy vegan restaurant at the Plaza. And she tells me how she hadn't been to Nancy Pelosi's house for Thanksgiving in Marin, and found out I had lied because I was a terrorist. And I'd already had a lot of interactions. I've been arrested by Pelosi a couple of times back in San Francisco. I actually ran my dogs with Michael Yaki, her manager of her San Francisco office, for years, and tried to cooperate with them with no success. And so, she apparently went on and on to this woman about how horrible I was and all my connections to terrorism and everything. But I've actually written, 3 books on nonviolence. And so, in fact, when I was taken off an airplane in Chicago O'Hare by Borders and Customs, they were like, "So how are you connected to the violent group Food Not Bombs?" And on the 3rd or 4th time of that question, I go, "Ma'am, it's not bombs." And I must say that the FBI report from that was really kind. The agent himself wrote a really glowing report about how wonderful Food Not Bombs was. So, very strange.
Do you feel like part of it has to do because you're serving vegan food and that's un-American because there's not an animal that died?
Early on, that definitely played a role. In fact, there's a great. I recently received some more FOIA documents, and there was actually in the Orange County Register or Weekly or whatever the entertainment paper was down there, a story, and these quotes are in this FBI document actually, of a Food Not Bombs volunteer being accused of burning a bunch of SUVs in a so-called eco-terrorist attack, and it turns out that and part of their whole thing is we know that they're anarcho-vegans, and this is why we know this house is why we're monitoring this house, because there's anarcho-vegans and Food Not Bombs activists in this house, and blah blah blah, and one of the things that house, those people were doing, which is why we have this FBI memo, was actually not around the SUV burning case, but around, they were surveilling them because they were trying to stop. They were protesting a meat packing plant in the area, and that became under scrutiny by organizing with Pomona Food Not Bombs, Santa Ana Food Not Bombs, and so on. And so that was why they were, they were in this commune that was terrible of anarcho vegans. So anyway, that definitely plays a role. And in fact, so we have a confluence, like in FBI documents. It's really wonderful. I love getting FBI documents. Anybody got more FBI documents about Food Not Bombs, send them my way. But they're so fascinating. And it's weird to look at something where your life was happening at XYZ time and then see what the FBI is saying about your life being at that time. It's very strange. But part of the problem, there's many levels. Sometimes we're just we're just research to the FBI, and they don't really got a case against anybody or anything. But there is a unit that's concerned about us because many of us are anarchists, right? So there's a whole wing of the FBI worried about anarchists. Then there's another wing worried about animal rights. Then there's the environmental area of these things. And then there's the peace and social justice team that has to worry about people organizing for peace and social justice. And so there's all these offices that have these their responsibility to keep Americans safe from people serving vegan meals to the homeless, and so they have to watch all these things. But we do have this intersection in that we take food to striking workers. So there's a labor angle to the FBI's investigations in us. We fed, we're vegan, so that's a problem. We serve food at we provided food to hunt saboteurs. We provided food to Redwood Summer, for example, and which is one of our bad Earth First connections. Or Aboriginal people. So that happens globally. So there's actually there's a unit spying on the connection between Food Not Bombs and Aboriginal sovereignty movements. Things like that. So. Yeah, it's very fascinating. And the new domestic terrorism law, there is actually a one section about white supremacists and Nazis and stuff like that. That's very interesting. The rest of them, however, are vegans and people that think that there should be some resistance to climate change crisis, and that maybe we shouldn't spend half our income tax on war, or maybe we shouldn't evict 40 million people into the streets, or something like that might be good. And so that's the the little list that they're going to discuss now about who the domestic terrorists are. Now, the interesting thing, Earth First is probably one of the groups they'll investigate. But they're just Earth First. We get to be all of them, except for Nazis and white supremacists. That's the only box we don't tick off. So I'm looking forward to see something, say something. Awareness Day, which is on September 25th, which is registered trademark. And and so it's one of my exciting fun things is that. And I do hope everyone calls in to the local FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, which you can get on that website, and let them know that you're seeing people serving vegan meals in your community, and that you're frightened.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thing. Is I did that. I have a bag full of like snacks and stuff. Because I just, if I'm driving around and I see a homeless person, I'll give them some snacks. Because like I'm not touring as much anymore. Like I don't have that much cash on me.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
But no, it is it's frightening because I handed some snacks to a homeless person, and everybody was just terrified of like, whoa, what did you provided sustenance to this human being, like you didn't, they didn't go out there and get this themselves. That's insane. And it's like the world had to stop for a moment. No one in the streets knew what to do, including myself, because I realized by feeding this person how much I really put their life in danger.
In what way? That they got, it was junk food. That was your problem.
That was my problem. I gave them, I was like, here's a bag of Doritos, and I think everybody was looking at me going, you crossed the picket line. Did you not hear about
exactly
the
right.
Frito-Lay?
Well, we had to stop handing out grapes for a while back in the 60s. Actually,
why would
we
you
did
need
not
to do that?
The grape boycott. You're too young to remember all the years of that and all the years of the no iceberg lettuce boycott. We've gone through a lot of boycotts over the years.
Kidding.
Yeah. You got to boycott. There's like, in fact, boycott capitalism. That's one of the things I thought might be useful back when I was 16. And then that's what I did.
Works? Do you feel like the boycotting? Because I have people that kind of talk to me about both sides of it, of why they don't think it works and why it does work. Do you feel like boycotts actually work? Do they drive change?
The issue is how there's a possibility of the Dorito boycott working, but the thing that it takes you. So there has to be this massive focus for many years, and you've got to get and that was now it's really hard. I don't know if a boycott works anymore. Obviously, boycott divestment movement freaks the heck out of the Israeli authorities. So that's positive. So that does, when there's that much repression backlash, that's a good sign. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of boycotts that a boycott of a local business that can be super effective, and the amount of boycotting that like none of it. There was such a high number of people in the 60s that just didn't buy table grapes, and particularly it was kind of localized in a certain sense in that it was California, and it eventually did have some reform effect. Unfortunately, that was all, but that was that mean now when you go around California, there's actually portable toilets for farm workers, and the conditions are a bit better, but still, not optimum. So I think there's, so here in our town, there was like a racist attack by customers who were friends of the owner of a very fancy restaurant here in Santa Cruz. And one aspect that shut the restaurant down was the fact that the entire workforce just walked away. And the other was there was a boycott because of that for a while. Now they rehabilitated and hired only white people, and so now they're cool. But they lost like half a year's worth of business. The thing that's been really shocking, so after this arrest in '88 that gave us clandestinely fame in the surveillance world, that angered a lot of people that read about. So we ended up getting in the San Francisco Chronicle and all the local papers on the August 15th arrest with this photo of riot police guarding the food from the hungry. That freaked people out, and so we ended up having a march the next Monday, and that next Monday being August 22nd, which is the date that the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force memo refers to. And I believe it was like, might have been 25 people arrested that day for serving food without a permit. And that day made the New York Times, the Times of London, the Times of India. It was on CNN. The only time we've been on CNN, the only time we will ever be on CNN, probably the rest of our lives. And but it was really hardcore, and so as a result, then people back then there was no email. So since I had been living on the street. When I moved to San Francisco, I'd gotten what they used to have this thing called mailboxes, etc. And you could get your mail there, and they had an answering service for $5 a month, unlimited calls. Right, that's a pretty good deal. It was on Polk Street, and I go down to pay my bill and to get my messages, and the poor guy goes, "Oh my God, I've hired 2 other people full time to answer your phone, and you're only paying me $5. This is crazy." And so I said, "Wow, that's terrible." And he said, "They have this thing called the answer machine, which they had just invented." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take, I'll go get one of those, And in fact, so when this arrests are happening, and I'm getting all these phone calls and letters, I had letters that were like, "Food Not Bombs, San Francisco," and I would get them. Can you imagine that? That was crazy.
That's
so
awesome.
Anyway, they all wanted to know how they could start a Food Not Bombs to piss off their town or whatever it was. They were so upset. So I had taken notes on making that chapter, because the first one, as I outlined earlier, kind of evolved. And this time I knew, okay, I'm going to do this systematically. So I set up my food distribution network, and for maybe 5 months, I just picked up food and took it to other soup kitchens and stuff. And then I tried to test places to serve, and decided that the little group that started to work with us thought Golden Gate Park was good, and so on. So I made this flyer called 7 Steps to Starting a Food Not Bombs. And I even mentioned that you could get an answering machine to never miss your messages. That was the first flyer.
Yeah.
Then another edition, I say you can even get a MySpace and communicate with the world. And when I look at these old flyers, it's just too funny. But so that's the so then I would mail that to people, and then so a chapter started in Victoria, British Columbia. There's a huge struggle already in the Lower East Side at Tompkins Square Park. So a group which has not missed a Sunday, even in the rain. They didn't technically go to Tompkins Square Park, but they serve food even around Sandy. I did a lot of the Sandy relief myself.
Oh, wow.
And they also this last flood, they served food out of the Catholic Worker House and the Joseph House, which is where they've been cooking the last maybe 10 years or something like that. That's where they were cooking during Occupy, was at the St. Joseph House.
That's what it should be, right? I mean, if you're a religious organization, then I feel like you should be partnering with organizations like Food Not Bombs or Earth First, right? Like, it just makes sense. If you do believe in God, and you believe that this world was given to us by God, then why wouldn't you want to help the people trying to make this world a better place, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we do have a relationship with Catholic workers all over the country. There's a certain, Dorothy Day, who started Catholic Workers, called herself a Christian anarchist. And there's actually a Christian anarchist movement that Food Not Bombs is connected to in the Philippines. And so that, we've, and actually there's a very, right now it's technically illegal to serve food in Houston, Texas. And our largest supporters of that are actually fundamentalist Christians. That, in fact, a fundamentalist Christian city councilor came out to risk arrest at the beginning of this ordinance. Now the ordinance has taken effect on September 1st. And so fortunately, no one has been arrested yet, but they are subject to arrest. And that to me seems foolhardy, since that would backfire, and theoretically the city knows that, and even though they technically have a law against feeding people, but we in that district, I believe the 11th Circuit goes to Houston, but I may be wrong. But we won a really good ruling against the city of Fort Lauderdale, where the judge was ruling. Judge Jordan wrote, "God, it was like the best thing I've ever read about the right to feed the hungry and the support of food on bombs." He's a federal judge, and in that circuit. So none of this has gone to the Supreme Court, which is obviously nobody would ever want this to go to the Supreme Court. But anyway, so we use that ruling to, at least for propaganda. It's not legally binding in other jurisdictions, but.
So what do you guys recommend, to folks when you do see a piece of legislation like what's going on in Houston? And didn't Florida have that too? Didn't Florida arrest some like 90-year-old guy that was feeding homeless people a couple years ago?
Well, okay, so that story. Well, so I did 500 days in jail in San Francisco, and I faced 25 to life in prison.
What?
Yeah. I was framed by the mayor's office, Frank Jordan at this time, second mayor that was arresting us, under the California Three Strikes law. And on the 4th of January, the law taking effect on the 1st of January, I was charged with assault, battery, strong arm robbery, when the mayor's film commissioner had my truck towed illegally from a parking space where I was serving food, and I went to a phone booth to call to get my truck back, and he attacked me in the phone booth, and then he claimed I stole the $99 beeper, which made it into the strike felony, and the proof of that is he purchased a $99 beeper later that afternoon. No beeper was found on me or inside of City Hall at any time, and so I got that charge, and then Amnesty International. So we started a campaign at the suggestion of Howard Zinn, when he came to do a letter writing campaign and stuff. And we made a video, which we now call Food on Bomb's Greatest Hits, but it was at the time called a video press release, and it was video of the police beating us up for serving food. That's why it's called Greatest Hits. And so anyway. And that actually just got censored by YouTube.
It
was like, it was my first censored video. I'm so excited. I've been trying to get censored. I cannot get censored like all my friends are. But anyway, so that was fun.
The badge of honor.
Yeah, it's trying to get censored. And then so anyway, so then I was handing out information about Amnesty International declared that if we were convicted of, they were doing an investigation into what was going on. I was handing out that literature. I got attacked by another politician, got assault with a deadly weapon because she slammed her door on me and my friend, amazing person, Jesse Mejia, who actually was 18 when he was part of the U.S. forces that liberated Dachau. And then he was also a young private that witnessed the one end of Operation Paperclip. Then I have another dear friend who he came to the U.S. because his father was part of Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip, for those who don't know, was that the scientists and experts that were working for the Nazis in Germany were recruited. And this is one of the things that Jesse Mejia so hated, was to see war criminals hanging out and partying in this hospital with U.S. generals, and then they would be taken back, many to the United States or to Argentina, where they set up like a little bohemian, playground down there for ex-Nazis that were allies of the U.S. A really interesting thing in this regard is, of course, Raytheon made the radars and everything for the Nazis, as they did for the U.S. and for the British. And in 1968, Raytheon won a lawsuit and collected damages for their factory outside of Dresden being destroyed during World War II, and they received millions and millions of dollars from the U.S. taxpayers to repay them for the damage done to their factory where they were building radars for the Nazis. So that's an interesting thing. Now, of course, the Secretary of Defense is Lloyd Austin of Raytheon fame. I lived in Tucson when 9/11 happened, and I helped organize a weapons inspection of Raytheon nuclear, that's where they make the cruise missiles and everything. And there was an awkward situation because we're looking for weapons of mass destruction, and Raytheon was kind of like, well, we don't really know what to say about that.
We've got all of them.
Because they don't want to say no, because you are giving them money to say yes. So it's a problem. But I had a lot of fun protesting Raytheon down there. And I've had a lot of conflicts with Raytheon over the years. In fact, well, before I even started Food Not Bombs, I was a park ranger at giving tours in Boston, and one of the at Bunker Hill at outside the USS Constitution at the Boston Naval Shipyard and at Faneuil Hall. I gave speeches about famous speeches there for a year. And I ran into I'd made a poster at that in those days that had the young girl that was napalmed in Vietnam, very famous picture. I'd cut it out of Life magazine, glued it on a piece of paper, glued logos on over top of that in as artistic a way as I could, one of them being Raytheon. And then I had under it, War is Murder for Profit, both in English and Spanish, and I glued it all over Boston. It's part of many of my public art projects that I did at the time, including a graffiti, a stencil of a nuclear mushroom cloud that had the question today, ? Which I put all over town. That became like a play called Murder Now by Boston Theater Works. It also became a movie called Sidewalk Sector. That was a lot of fun. Anyway, so that the vice president of Raytheon was the manager of this thing called The Whites of Your Eyes, which is some kind of patriotic thing next to the Boston Naval Shipyard. And when it opened, I went to the grand opening in my Park Service uniform with my name on my badge. And some reason the vice president's daughter knew that I was the guy behind the poster and started hassling me. It was kind of fun. So, and then it turns out, I don't know if you recall the very famous photo of the man in Baghdad holding his daughter, and her legs are melting, and Brian Fisk had identified that the cruise missile that hit that produce market and where that photo was taken was made in Tucson, because they had the middle label advertising where it was made. And so I took printed 700 copies, 1117 of that, with the Raytheon logo at the top, and changed their tagline to "Killing is our business" or whatever. Glued it systematically around the factory. Then around that, then I knew where the engineers lived, so I glued it all over their neighborhood and everything. And then that became a huge problem in the local paper, and it was funny because a guest article said my husband works there, right? They're working, that young man should do something useful with his life, like feed the homeless. I thought that was so cool. And I wasn't young. I was young from way I'm thinking now, but at the time I thought I was old. So anyway, and I thought that was funny. So anyway,
amazing.
The serendipity of being involved in Food Not Bombs never ends. It is a comedy routine. It's a 41-year comedy routine.
I mean,
one-stop living theater.
Yeah, the stuff that you've done is, I mean, I feel like I could sit here. I love the way you kind of rounded out that story. By the way, that was pretty masterful. I don't know if you did that on purpose or if that just happened, but the way you rounded that out, it's like there's like a movie in my head that I've written already we'll see if I make about all the shit that that's incredible. Like that's really incredible. And what I really love is the fact that, like, you're doing all of these things, like you're using all of these tools in the activist tool belt, where it's
Yes.
art, it's organizing, it's labor organizing, not just activist organizing, but also labor organizing. There's all these things. Boom, there you go, folks. Kieth McHenry of Food Not Bombs. That's part one. That's part one of two. Next week we'll have the second part, the grand conclusion, and a little bit of advice and more stories from Kieth. And if you're interested already, if this has grabbed you and you want to partner or work with or what have you with Food Not Bombs, go to foodnotbombs.net. Various ways to help out, various ways to join the organization, and fight back, against oppressive capitalism. Fight back against a system that says feeding people is a threat. You really have to ask yourself whether you really want to support a system that thinks feeding human beings and helping cover a basic human right is a threat, is a national security threat. Do you want to support a system like that? Because I sure shit don't. I just don't. I think this system is rotted to the core and needs to be removed. It's like, my roommate has a planter, and had some plants in it. And when she was out of town, I looked in there and I was like, well, the soil's still wet, so I don't need to water it. It doesn't need to be watered. And it's been the temperature's been fluctuating, and there have been less extremely hot days. And I kept looking at it, and I looked into it, and there was fungus growing in the soil. There was mold growing in the soil. And I was like, uh-oh, this can't be good. And I wonder how long it's been here, and I wonder if it's been contributing to possibly me not feeling great, because the soil has this terrible thing in it. Well, terrible for me. So I took it out, and I let her know, hey, you have to clear out that planter. That's getting deep in, and I think the plants are not going to make it through, so I'm going to set it outside. Maybe that'll kill it, but you should really get rid of all the soil and clean it out before you put anything new in it. And I think that's what we need to do with capitalism. It's mold. It's fungus. It is an invasive species that has, corrupted our souls. And we have to get rid of it, clean out this economic system, and then fill it with something new. Something that's going to, bring life and focus on creation rather than destruction, because I think that's what capitalism has done. It's created a system where we profit off of destruction. And that's not a sustainable system. That's not a system that I want to be a part of. So we're creating something different. Organizations like Food Not Bombs, is what they do is they create a world that they would like to see, where people are fed, where people are housed. A system where profit doesn't need to be the be-all, end-all of everything. Money is a tool that can be used to benefit mankind and the planet and all of its creatures, not just human beings. My view, and this is going to, I don't know if this sounds too wacky, but my view is that, look, I don't know what made the cognitive leap happen, whether it was a different digestive process, or I don't know, right? I don't know what caused it. But I'll tell you this, is that it happened, right? And it gave us the ability to think differently than other animals, be aware of ourselves, of our consciousness, of the world around us. And I genuinely believe that the reason why this happened to this species, or why the cognitive leap happened, period, is because we are supposed to be stewards of this planet. We are supposed to use technology and our advancements and what we're doing to not just better our lives, but the life of the planet too. That's our role. That's our responsibility. And I think, money could have been a tool for that. It certainly could have been, but it's not. It's not that. I feel like I've brought this up before. I think I've talked about this idea. A very good friend of mine talks about ethical capitalism, whether ethical capitalism exists or not. I don't believe it does, right? And the example that he uses, because we're both nerds and pop culture people, right? Or I guess not pop culture, but we're both nerdy people. We're part of that nerd culture, that's fear. Which is art because it challenges society and talks about subversive things. Anyway, people like Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, these billionaires in the comic books that have become these superheroes, are seen as folks that use their wealth to help the world around them. And I think that is an example of comic books creating a world they would like to see. That still doesn't drop capitalism, unfortunately. But, ethical capitalism doesn't exist because by virtue, capitalism is a system that needs infinite profit in a finite world. It needs infinite resources in a finite world. Well, that system is bound to fail. And if you put any sort of regulations on it, it does not become capitalism anymore. It is now something different. Capitalism is about endless consumption in a finite world. Capitalism is about destruction. You can't do that without destroying everything. It goes against the laws of nature. Matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. And capitalism wants to create more shit than there is so that it can profit off of it. So putting any sort of restrictions on it, ethics, compassion, whatever, changes it completely. It's no longer capitalism. So even when you do, right, even when you kind of put that into fiction, and you're like, oh, this is what I wish capitalists would do. Yeah, it's what we all wish capitalists would do. And that thing really winds up being, is not being capitalist. What we want capitalists to do is to stop being capitalists. That's what we want them to do. So, I just don't believe that we can see that. But I think that's what a lot of us are doing is in the activist world, and I try to practice this in as much as I can in my life, is even in these smaller interactions that we have day to day with each other, whether it's just hanging out with friends and whatnot, and or just people that we see on the street, or people behind a cash register or what have you. We should be acting in a way that is the world we want to see. I try to practice as much kindness as I can. Not to a obviously, I'm not taking it to an extreme here. But yeah, that is something that I do. I want to be an example of the world that I would like to see. And I think people like Kieth McHenry and a lot of other activists and organizers, that's exactly what they're doing. And if you look at it from that perspective, the people that go against them and say that they're, oh, why can't they just fall in line? Maybe we'll stop saying shit like that. And think, okay, well, what's the type of world that I want to see? Start being a little bit more honest with themselves rather than thinking, having any sort of feelings about anything is weakness and things like that. Those toxic thoughts, those toxic negative thoughts that we have, where we can't take accountability because we'll get in trouble. Well, yeah, you're going to get in trouble, but you did something fucking stupid, or you did something wrong, or you did something hurtful. But a lot of that can be reduced if you take accountability and legitimately apologize and try to not do that again and be a better person and so on and so forth. But that's not allowable within the system that we have. And the people that do work on creating a world or doing things so that, they can help create a world that's better and outside the framework of needing money all the time, where that's the only central focus of everything, are chastised for that. And I think that's just fucking dumb. Anyway, the very long ending rant here. Thank you guys for sticking around. But we have another part coming up next week. Hey, quick little announcement before I go too. This is something that I did want to mention. On Sundays, I send out an email to my email list, with all the new content that I put out. Obviously, the last month and a half has been their lack of. I haven't really put a lot of content out. I've written an essay. I've done some podcasts, but I'm kind of facing this little bit of this creative block and working through it the way that I can. So, what I'm planning on doing for not just my benefit, but just so everybody knows what's up, is I think on those emails on Sundays, I'm going to put out the schedule of the week. Ron Placone does something similar to this. But basically, it'll give me internal and external accountability, meaning I'm accountable not just to myself, but because I'm letting you guys know what I'm planning on doing that week, it makes me accountable to that. It gives me a little bit more focus and direction. So if you guys want to be a part of my mental health journey and you're already on the email list, then you're kind of already going to be a part of that. But if you are not, you can go to krishmohanhaha.substack.com. That's krishmohanhaha.substack.com, and sign up for my email list there. And that way you'll get not just all of the videos and essays and content that I put out throughout the week, but a little schedule of, hey, I'm working on, there'll be a new Taboo Table Talk, but there'll also be a new Dispatch this week because I'm working on one. And then I'm going to start working on this other project too. So, and here's a deadline for that. But I'm going to start working on it this week. So you guys know, some of the things that are coming down the pipeline. And I'm going to I'm trying to operate off of some lists so that I can keep things a little bit more organized, because I think when I get into this headspace, I get a little too scattered and things wind up going all over the place, and having them in one centralized location is probably a much better idea than not. So, so anyway, the email is going to have a schedule. So if you haven't signed up for the email list, krishmohanhaha.substack.com is the way to go. For that. So, with all that said and done, we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm excited to share with you guys the second part of this conversation. But till then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and stay taboo, everybody. Bye, guys.